Hi, my name's Mackenzie,
And my name's Sydney.
and we chose the myth that autism is caused by parental neglect.
We chose this topic because we felt as though, even in today's world, parents still tend to blame themselves for the diagnosis of their child. As future educators, we feel that it was important to debunk this myth in order to support the parents of our future students who may experience the same feelings.
The term refrigerator mother was coined by Austrian psychiatrist Leo Kanner in the 1940s to describe a mother whose cold, uncaring style traumatized her child so much that they retreated into autism.
There are 4 important figures when it comes to this topic. The first is Freud. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis, a clinical method for treating psychopathology through dialogue between a patient and a psychoanalyst. The second is Kanner. Leo Kanner was a Ukrainian Austrian-American psychiatrist, physician, and social activist, best known for his work related to autism.
The other 2 important figures are Bettelheim and Rimland. Bruno Bettelheim was an Austrian-born psychologist, scholar, public intellectual, and author who spent most of his academic and clinical career in the United States. An early writer on autism, Bettelheim's work focused on the education of emotionally disturbed children, as well as Freudian psychology more generally. Bernard Rimland was an American research psychologist, writer, lecturer, and influential person in the field of developmental disorders.
The history of this myth begins with Sigmund Freud. He believed that almost all psychological issues stemmed from early childhood trauma. Autism was believed to be a form of mental illness, and so it was logical to assume that it was caused by early trauma.
Leo Kanner initially favored his biologically oriented explanation, but he was puzzled by his observation that some of the mothers of children with autism in his care seemed emotionally and socially detached. Since Freud's psychoanalysis was becoming popular, Kanner began to consider that, rather than being biologically vulnerable, children become autistic as a form of withdrawal from the emotional coldness of their mothers.
Later, as Kanner and autism expert Hans Asperger began to explore the disorder, they worked almost primarily with upper-class parents whose self-presentation may have appeared formal and cold. Though Kanner believed that autism was probably innate in the child, he also noticed an apparent coldness on the part of his patients' mothers and assumed that this added to the problem. Kanner's subsequent research on children with autism showed that there was no evidence for parental mistreatment, overt rejection, or abandonment as a factor in a child's having autism.
Dr. Bruno Bettelheim believed that circumstances of severe deprivation are the basis of severe emotional disturbance. Consequently, through his work with children, he concluded that the emotional disorder now known as autism is a psychotic disturbance caused by maternal neglect. For Bettelheim, autism was an empty fortress, the title of his 1967 book on that subject. Children took shelter there from the cruelty and indifference of their parents, mothers especially, who were supposed to love them but instead denied their humanity.
This is an excerpt from Bettelheim's book The Empty Fortress in regards to children with autism. All my life, I have been working with children whose lives were destroyed because their mothers hated them. We felt as though this quote was important to include because it truly showed the harsh nature of Bettelheim's theory. After his death from suicide in 1990, Bettelheim was accused of abuse at the school he ran. A typical experience was described by Charles Picou, a writer who spent a decade at the orthogenic school as a child. Picou and others accused Bettelheim of slapping, tormenting, beating, sexually abusing, and humiliating students. Then, reporters began to question the very credentials upon which Bettelheim had built his career. Biographers revealed that he did not have a degree or any formal training in psychology. In 1964, Dr. Bernard Rimland, a psychologist and the father of a child with autism, showed through analysis of data gathered from twins that the occurrence of autism has a strong genetic basis and is not linked to maternal behavior. His work shifted the focus of blame from so-called refrigerator mothers and launched a vigorous new era of research into the biological basis of autism. Bernard Rimland was the founder and director of the Autism Research Institute. As a parent of a child with autism, he had invested interest in exploring and better understanding causes of autism, and in erasing the popular concept that poor parenting was to blame. His research, along with his work in bringing parents together as self-advocates, changed thinking about the roots of autism. By the early 1970s, the idea of refrigerator mothers was no longer accepted, and parenting approaches were no longer the focus of research into the causes of autism.
Eventually, researchers began to realize that the condition is rooted in biology, not parenting, and that its behaviors fall along a spectrum. Today, the refrigerator mother theory has been disproven, an example of the ways in which society tries to blame parents for developmental disorders that are difficult to treat or accept. Currently, autism spectrum disorders are classified as neurodevelopmental disorders in which multiple genetic and environmental factors play roles in the expression of the disorders.
Mothers came to believe that they were responsible for their children's autism, and the sense of shame, guilt, and stigma that they experienced stayed with them, not only during the period when psychoanalysis was at its height, but for decades afterwards. Psychological damage may also occur both to wrongfully guilt-ridden parents and to people with autism who get the message that they have an illness and are sick.
Especially in the world of special education, it would be essential to understand this myth because you may encounter parents that may think that they are still to blame, but it is important to not point the finger. Rather than blaming the parents, we should provide them with supports to enrich their child's life.